And then I pulled the 500. Fuck, he's actually done it. The lift of the century, even though I've got the fucking trademark, that motherfucker stole it from me. Fuck, can I swear?
Heavily encouraged.
Okay, good. I had to treat everything I set out to do, and it was like, fuck, what next? Like, when you're 200 kilo, these things are fucking hard tasks. Like, struggle to put your socks on. I never gave up this promise to my nan to become the world's strongest man. Sorry, man.
Today's podcast is with none other than Eddie Hall. Eddie is, well, just a human phenom as far as genetics goes. You know, the guy is just gifted. First person on planet Earth to deadlift 500 kilos as half a ton. 2017 world's strongest man, 5 or 6 times strongest man in England, strongest man in the UK. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger himself that nicknamed Eddie Hall the Beast. And today's podcast, I swear to you, is an honor, a privilege. So before we get going, guys, I'd like to thank Browns, ESS, Maypole, Alberta, Garmin, Wellbees.mt, Stretta, our friends at personalfinancetool.com, Derek Meats, Business Labs, and Grotto Tavern. Patreon.com/Joel Malia if you'd like to be here, if you'd like to be around. There's a very beautiful set of faces here today. And here we go, myself and Eddie Hall. That looks tiny in your hands, Jesus Christ. All right, are you comfortable?
Yeah.
All right, can you hear him well? All right, fantastic. So Eddie Hall, look, I'll do the introduction once you leave because I know you're busy, but I'll just give the live audience here a quick synopsis.
Yeah, sure.
So you're the first person to pull a deadlift of half a ton. You're also the world's strongest man of 2017, obviously strongest man in England, strongest man in the UK. Arnold Schwarzenegger himself gave you the nickname the Beast at the Arnold Classic, if I'm
That's it, yeah.
Yes. Bro, it's an absolute fucking smashing honor for me to be sitting with you here right now.
Thank you, man.
And you fucking come to our island for your show.
Yeah.
Tell it. Okay, so let us know why you're here.
So, I mean, I came to Malta last year as part of the Malta tourism, just do a bit of promotion for the country and just fell in love with the place. You know, the culture, the people, the weather. And yeah, I made a lot of contacts here through the film industry, and I've wanted to do I wanted to do Beast Games originally, and then Mr. Beast came out with the Beast Games. Yeah. So even though I've got the fucking trademark, that motherfucker stole it from me. So I ended up changing the name to Battle of the Beast, which I actually think is more suited. Yes. So, you know, it's something I want to do for a very long time.
Okay.
And I thought, put my heads together with a few film commissioners and a few producers and a few directors, and we met with Malta Tourism, and we got a bit of backing from them, and here we are. We're hosting and producing Battle of the Beasts.
So can you give us an idea of like what is the Battle of the Beasts? What can audiences expect?
So Battle of the Beasts, I mean, I come from a strongman background. Obviously, I won the world's strongest man, and you know, competing through the ranks in the UK, like England strongest man, Britain strongest man, UK strongest man. I've done it my whole life, and I've been around strongman since I was 19 years of age. I'm 37 now.
Yeah.
And strongman's become a little bit stale. It's the same events regurgitated over and over again with pretty much the same athletes doing the same events, the same implements. It gets a little bit boring. So I thought it needs a little bit of a reinvention. So the Battle of the Beasts is a strongman contest, but we're also adding a massive entertainment element to it, and putting a bit more emphasis on the actual contestants, the athletes themselves, and how they express themselves and how they go about their day in the life, and you know what they eat. So the contest is strongman, but we're doing a belly flop competition as one of the events.
You participating?
Maybe, we'll see. And they're going to get marked down on like creativity, how loud they slap on the water, and how much pain they inflict on themselves. We've also got a sumo wrestling competition, which is, I think, very raw, very organic. It's very alpha male. You know, and I think it's not done in strongman sports. It has done in the past, but I feel like a little bit of contact and a little bit of aggression could really bring out the best in these guys. And then, of course, we've got an eating competition where they've got to sit down and eat a very large amount of food.
But you guys are quite used to eating like humongous amounts.
Exactly. We are. You know, a top level strongman will consume 10 to 12,000 calories a day. So in one sitting with, a lot of pressure on them, they could probably 15, 20,000 calories in one hit. So we're going to see how many calories these guys can eat in one go. So that's one of the events.
Can the Maltese population and the Maltese people come and watch these things?
Yeah, so head over to Instagram, @battleofthebeasts_official. There's going to be a ticket link on there on the Instagram page. And yeah, there's a couple of hundred tickets left, I believe. And yeah, you can come and watch and come in person and come and cheer and come be on the TV.
So I'll be there. I know my family will be there.
Awesome.
So I'd like to, for people that maybe don't know that much about your biography, your background, you're from a place called Stoke-on-Trent, which is in the northern part of England. What was that like growing up in Stoke-on-Trent?
Pretty rough. I mean, so in England, we have these places that we live. You have posh places that you live, and then you have council estates. And I would say 80% of the population is made up of council estates. And it's basically where people gather together to live, to work. There'll be like mining towns. There'll be towns where they make tea. There'll be towns where they make pottery. And all these towns, all the population sits around that business. And basically those businesses over time have diminished, gone bankrupt, or moved over to places like China. It's a lot more efficiently to produce these kind of things and get. So you're left with these working men's towns that have no work, and it leads to a lot of unemployment, a lot of drugs, a lot of crime, a lot of drinking.
Much of it you got involved in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I was quite lucky. I grew up in a semi-posh area, but I was surrounded by the council estates, and all my friends were from council estates. So that I was amongst them. It was quite a rough upbringing. Youngest of two brothers as well, or three brothers. So,
and your dad was I believe, the health and safety officer in a factory.
He was, yes, he was.
So did this kind of like exodus of manufacturing affect your father?
No, I mean, he stayed in a steady job pretty much his whole life, which I think is a big part of why I never wanted to stay in a 9-to-5 job, is watching my dad be miserable for 30 years working in a factory, hating his fucking life. Yeah. And can I swear?
Yeah, no, entirely. Okay. It's heavily encouraged.
Okay, good. Fucking great. Right. So yeah, my dad worked in a factory for 30 fucking years and had the most miserable life ever working under somebody. And I guess being around that and seeing my dad, provide for the family, number one, but number two, just be fucking miserable in what he did. So that was a big part of, I guess, why I wanted to break the mold and do something different.
Yeah. In your book, you show a lot of appreciation, however, for your parents, for also some of the teachers that kind of like stepped up, and you didn't have a fantastic time at school.
No.
In fact, at the point you got expelled, and we'll get to that. But before you were actually a strongman, you were lifting weights. You were a swimmer.
I was.
You were a national champion swimmer.
Yeah. I was the best swimmer in the country.
That's fucking crazy, because you don't look like a swimmer.
I know. I don't anymore. You could probably pull up some pictures of when I was like 10 years old. And I was ripped to shreds.
Where can we find these?
I don't know. If you just Google Eddie Hall swimmer or swimming.
Yeah, okay. So while he does that, how does someone from Stoke-on-Trent get into swimming? That's you at how old?
I would say that I'd be like 14 years old.
Okay, so you're pretty shredded already.
Yeah, 14 years old.
Because you have that fucking gene, the Hercules myostatin thing.
Yeah, exactly. So a little bit unbeknown to me. Sorry, 2 seconds. Give me 10.
How I would usually tell
my PA
the person.
I know I'm terrible. So no, we're swimming. So I guess you're in the pool 2 hours in the morning before school, and you do 2 hours after school in the evenings. So it's very heavy. You're training 14 to 18 hours a week in the pool. And obviously I got a lot of backing, so a lot of government funding. So, I had a lot of nutrition advice, a lot of coaching, like gym work. So at 14 years of age, I was basically a fully grown man at 14.
Is that where you get your base for discipline?
Yeah, 100%. I think it taught me that, hard work and being consistent equaled results. It was just such a such a life-changing thing for me was going into swimming. And I think those attributes of what you put in is what you get out carried me through my whole life, through to, weightlifting, to strongman, to bodybuilding, to any job.
So now becoming a film producer.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I just need to make one remark, because every time we're leaning on the table, we didn't prepare for this. So just so you know,
moving.
We toured the country 6 times over to find a chair for you.
Okay.
But in so doing, we didn't take into account the table. So if the table finally collapses, we're going to have the first stand.
It's feeling a bit wobbly. Yeah, I like to lean on shit because I'm so heavy, so sorry.
Yeah, and I heard you had a long day of filming as well, so I really do appreciate you making the time. So then you got kind of tired of swimming because you got like a bit too militant. What happened?
Yeah, a bit too military. I was on the world-class potential squad. I was on basically the junior Olympic team for England, and they put you through this regiment, where everyone would finish school and have 6 weeks school holidays. I'd go and do swimming camps. So I would never have any time to myself. I was in the pool before school. I was in the pool after school. I didn't have any social life. So it just got to the point where I was like, I fucking hate this. I was so good at it, like the best in the country, broke multiple British records. I was on track to be a multiple gold medalist at the Olympics, but I just fucking hated the sport. It just became boring, stale, and just militarized. If you weren't in the pool and doing exactly 200 laps of the pool within 15 minutes, you were chucked out. It was just such bullshit. So I was quite happy to walk away at that point.
Was there any point where you regretted having been on such a path to Olympic glory?
So there's always I had the question with my old swimming coach a few years back, and he said, well, he said 100% you would have gone on and won gold medals at the Olympics if you'd have carried on. I'm like, I know I would have, but I fucking hated swimming. I just became such a poisonous thing in my life. And he said, well, look at you now, like world's strongest man. He said, if you're given the choice, go back in time. If you're given the choice to replay your life, would you go Olympic gold medalist swimmer, or would you go world's strongest man? World's strongest man all day. Yeah. And the reason being is, and it sounds quite big-headed to say this, but there's been a lot of fucking people that have won Olympic gold medals. A lot. There's only, I think, 25 people that have ever won the world's strongest man. It's a very, very special, unique title. Yeah. So, yeah.
And how lucky are you to have a fucking choice? You're like, gold Olympic swimmer or world's strongest man. Let me have it.
Well, nothing's a certainty. Nothing's a certainty, is it? But yeah.
You consider yourself blessed?
Of course, yeah. I'm lucky and I am blessed, yeah. I mean, of course, I've worked hard for it, but I think, where I am in life now, and I'm very happy and content. I'm definitely lucky and blessed, yes.
Look, one thing that's kind of is, well, it jumped out at me while I was, reading your story and all of that, where particularly these 2 teachers that you had. So I had one guy who was your tutor after you got kicked out of school because, plot twist, he gets kicked out of school.
Yeah.
And the other guy was your primary school teacher. His name escapes me. I think it's Mr. Strickland.
Mr. Sterling.
Mr. Sterling.
Yeah, Sterling, yeah.
Xbajt taħdem mid-dar jew ġo xi kafetterija storbjuża, mela mhux tiġi saħdejna l-business labs, post ċentrali, kwiet sabiħ, u li fih tista' tagħmel użu minn hot desks, uffiċċji, boardrooms li trid. Tista' taqbad u tfetx fuq l-adba mingħajr ma tafżal il-ħadd u serraħ rasek li żed inqeda. U jekk titlaq 4 min nies jew 40 se joħorġuk ta' nies. Business labs. Shit it aktar. Can you tell us a bit about what effects teachers can have on the life of someone like yourself?
I think teachers play one of the biggest roles in kids' lives, probably in some ways bigger than parents. And I think the way they act and the way they sort of portray themselves in the classroom is how kids perceive adults to be. Yeah. And if you've got a teacher who's an absolute asshole, which is majority of the time, teachers just don't want to be there. They're paid low wage, they're overworked, they've got fuck knows how much paperwork to do. And you can see that in the teachers that don't want to be there. And that behavior rubs off on the kids, and it makes you not want to give a fuck, and it makes you not want to, do good things in your academics. But then when you've got a teacher who is very positive and understands, brings himself down to your level and reasons with you and has fun with you and interacts with you, levels with you, I think that can make a hell of a difference. And I've had those teachers. I think I had, to be honest, the only decent teacher I had was Mr. Sterling in my primary school. And then when I hit high school, pretty much everyone was a fucking asshole.
You did have one supplementary teacher that one time, on the way out, like he let everyone leave the classroom and said, "Hey, Eddie, I need to talk to you."
Yeah. So there was a teacher once who it was a substitute teacher, and I was always the class clown. So I'd always mess around in class. I'd always, just if there's something you shouldn't be doing, I'd be fucking doing it. And obviously, when a substitute teacher comes in, you tend to push those boundaries, don't you? You tend to push that teacher to limit, like, when's this motherfucker going to break? Let's keep pushing this guy till he cracks. So I did that with this teacher, and he didn't break. And then after he kept me behind, and afterwards he really like laid into me, like, who the fuck are you? Like, what do you think you're going to do when you're older? Proper stabbing me in the chest, like hurting me, like, what the fuck are you going to be doing? And I was like, at the time I was a swimmer, so I was like, well, I'm just going to be a national champion. I'm going to be an Olympic swimmer. I don't need to learn this shit. And he gave me the biggest bollocking of my life, like really almost like attacking me, stabbing me in the chest. And the words he said to me were along the lines of, like, you might well be a fucking champion swimmer, but if you can't fucking spell and add up, you're going to be the thickest cunt on the planet Earth, basically. And it rubbed off on me. This one teacher who just had a very few words and probably punched me a little bit too hard.
Nowadays, he'd probably not keep his job, most likely now.
Yeah, I didn't grass on him. I think I was actually quite thankful for him, in a way.
Were you immediately thankful for him?
Not immediately, but yeah, I remember walking out the classroom and I was like, shall I go fucking tell the headmaster? But then I remember he was a cunt, so I couldn't really go to the headmaster. So I just sort of absorbed it, took it on the chin. And then I'd say like the weeks, months, years following, it just always resonated with me, this one teacher. And it did play a big part. It made me sort of sit back and be like, yeah, I need to listen to this, in the maths and the English, right? I need to learn this. I need to get the pass grade so I can get to college and do X, Y, and Z. So, yeah, it was one substitute teacher who just had enough of me and put me in my place.
So Sterling, the substitute teacher, and Kevin. We don't know. Do you remember Kevin's surname? Because we couldn't find it.
Oh God, I can't remember Kevin. So there's Mr. Sterling was the primary school teacher, and then the substitute teacher, I don't have a fucking clue what his name was.
Yeah. Kevin was your tutor.
Kevin.
The guy who tutored you once you got expelled.
Yes. So I was expelled from school for knocking a guy's teeth out because he ended up being a fucking pedo. That's the truth, by the way. Oh. And
so essentially, I knew that you kind of essentially bullied the bully.
I did. Yeah.
Can you let us know? Can you explain the story? Because there was quite a bit of drama. There was a bit of entrapment going on into this.
I mean, there was always, it doesn't matter where you go in life, whether it be a school or a workplace or a nightclub, there's always one dickhead. Always. Don't matter where you fucking go in the world, there's always one dickhead. And he was that dickhead. So I just made it my mission to fucking put this dickhead in his place. He was a very vile bully. He used to do some disgusting things to other people. And so, yeah, I ended up just smashing him in the face and got expelled for it. So,
any regrets?
No fucking regrets. No, that motherfucker got done for, I'm sure he got done for bumming a 13, 14-year-old boy when he was like 25 or something. So fuck him. Yeah, he was a wrong one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I landed a good hit on a wrong one.
What if Maximus landed a good hit on a wrong one at school? How would you? What's your reaction there?
Hey, he's gonna get some rewards when he gets in, mate.
So anyway, look. Aside from your issues at school, you also had you'd get in trouble quite a lot. You had episodes of violence outside of school. You had issues with drugs at a point.
Yeah.
At the point you were getting arrested literally once every weekend or very frequently, let's say.
Yeah, so I say
Were you an angry child, Eddie?
I was, yeah. I think being the youngest of three brothers was, that's where the majority of the bullying came from.
Okay.
My brothers.
Are you the younger one?
I'm
or?
the youngest.
Okay.
Yeah, so my two older brothers beat the living fucking daylights out of me on a daily basis. I can hand on heart say there wasn't a day in my life where I didn't either throw a punch or get punched in the face. Every fucking day of my life.
Okay.
So yeah, the bullying was quite rife in that respect.
Is that what made you angry?
I guess it was a lot of undermined sort of aggression that I guess took out on other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, drinking drugs was quite rife. I was a pisshead when I was like 12, 13 years of age. I would get a crate of beer every single day after school and go get pissed. Smoking pot, doing cocaine. Yeah, I was a naughty boy, definitely. And I can't count how many times I woke up in a police cell. Like God knows how many times. Luckily, nothing ever stuck. Like nothing ever, no prison time. Nothing ever stuck to the wall, so to say. But yeah, geez, I've been arrested fucking a lot of times.
Was that stress for your family?
Yeah, geez. Yeah, my mum, yeah, she was very stressed. I think my dad just plodded on with his work. But I remember my mum being in tears many a time, picking me up from the police station and being expelled from school and whatever else. So yeah, it was quite stressful.
Yeah. Another important person in your life was, of course, your nan.
Yeah.
And you said that she comes off as like this refuge in your life. Like you say, Nan is like a warm blanket in your book. You said I could never scowl at Nan in the same way I scowl at my parents. What was so special about your Nan?
I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of people out there that could probably resonate with me here, and you just have this unfound connection with your grandparents. They dote on you, don't they? They loaf on you. They give you cake, they give you sweets, they give you pop. And it sounds like simple shit, but when you're a young boy and you just want to play the PlayStation and eat cake and microchips, it becomes your safe place. It becomes your happy place. And my nan was my escape from all the drink, the drugs, the fighting. Because when I was there, none of that happened. It was like my happy place. So yeah, my nan was a massive anchor in my life. And every time I would get in these horrendous situations with the police and drink and drugs, right, fuck off your nans for a couple of days. And it completely changed me, and I wouldn't dare ever speak ill to my nan or say anything nasty to my nan because she never once raised a voice to me or slapped me or, she was a good loving nana,
But did she say anything? No, that's not the grandmother. That's the paternal.
Yeah, that's
the paternal grandmother.
So this is my dad's mother who she was vicious. she was a really cool nan, but yeah, she was she would say what she thought about people, and I've been in the supermarket with her before, and she's told people to fucking get the fuck away from her, and but yeah, that was another nan.
That's the paternal. That's your dad's.
That's my dad's mom. It was my mum's mum. Who
Sheila Jackson.
Sheila Jackson.
Sheila Jackson. At the same time, you were kind of developing a passion for lifting weights and getting big.
Yeah. So
when did that start?
So I went through a really bad phase in my life. So my nan got diagnosed with cancer, which obviously just turned my world upside down. Expelled from high school, fighting, drugs. I managed to get a girl pregnant when I was 13. So my world just got tipped upside down,
You said when you were 13?
13. Yeah. Okay. So my world just got tipped upside down. Like all this shit just happened all at once. And I spiraled into this horrendous depression, like anxiety attacks and just moping around, and just my energy was through the deck, and I couldn't swim. Everything just hit the ceiling, so to say. And that went on for about 2 years. So I went to a doctor and clinically diagnosed with depression. Prescribed Prozac, which is the main medication for depression, or it was back then. Yeah. And then I had to see a psychiatrist once a week, every single week for 2 years. And during that 2 years, a lot of dark times, a lot of fighting, a lot of drugs. A lot of fucking waking up in a police cell.
So you were on Prozac and you're still getting into fights?
Yeah. So a nasty mix. And then it was my mum, actually, one day, sort of came home from work, and I don't know, I'd probably spent all day wanking and fucking playing the PlayStation, whatever kids do. And she said, Luke, you can't do this all day, every day for the rest of your life. You've got to do something with yourself. Why don't you go to the fucking gym? So I did. So I joined, well, she paid for my membership to go to this gym that was down the road. Total Fitness, it was called back in the day. And I started lifting weights. And straight away, I was put under people's wings. You know, there were guys that had been lifting weights there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You know, they were old guys. And they took me under their wing, and I trained, you know, all the body parts with them, the legs, the chest, the back, the shoulders. And before you know it, I had this routine. And every time I went to the gym, I would walk out a better person. I would walk out with this feeling of self-worth, this feeling of euphoria. And very quickly, my depression disappeared.
Wow.
And I put it down to going to the gym. And that, I'd say at 14 years of age, when I was expelled from school, all my mates would be at school studying for the maths and GCSE, and I was there pumping iron and bettering myself. But I also think that, like, I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason. And I did actually get good GCSE grades in the end because of my home tutoring. So I had a teacher come to my house and do all my home tutoring. I learned a lot more. You know, I didn't misbehave for this guy. I just sat down and I learned, and I passed all my GCSEs, the exams from high school. But I think the best lessons I learned was when I went to the gym and I would listen to these older gentlemen about real life problems, about mortgages, about jobs, about wives, the kids, the grandkids, all these experiences that they had. And I just fucking absorbed it all. And they basically planned out my life for me. You know, they were talking about pensions, and they were like, never pay into a pension. And I was like a fucking goldfish, like absorbing all this. Like, why? Well, you know, you're just giving money to the government. You're never going to have a pot to piss in. So the first thing I did, they were saying buy a house, but that's your pension. So the first thing I did the day I turned 18 was buy a house. So, and that was like off the advice of these guys that I've been training with for 4 or 5 years, you know, in the gym. So
why do you think they took such a liking to you?
I don't know. I bet they probably see the bit like the bad kid in me, and thought, you know, this he's going through some shit. You know, all the depression, the drink, the drugs. I was very open with them about that, and I guess they just saw you know, I guess guys do, don't they? Especially younger kids. Like, you get apprentices at work, you take them under your wing, you show them the ways, and it's rewarding, isn't it? And I guess they saw me as this, you know, sort of rewarding opportunity for themselves.
Yeah, an opportunity to kind of share their life experience with someone that's going through hardship, and probably they saw the potential in you as well.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So at which point did you say, you know, fuck it, I'm going to be world's strongest man now?
So I continued my weightlifting journey right up through, up to like 17 years of age.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I got to about 17 where it became quite obvious that I was a lot bigger and stronger than most of the people in the gym. And this was a big gym of like 6,000 members. You know, it's like the biggest gym in my area. So I then took it real seriously, and I got a full-time job. I was a mechanic, and started getting more. When you get a job, you get more regimented. Yeah. You know, you go to work, you go to the gym, you have your tea, whatever. It becomes more of a regime, doesn't it, when you've got a day job? And then I guess, fast forward to about 19 years of age, I am like lifting weights in the gym that people wouldn't, like, they'd be gathering dust until I came along, you know, like just lifting ridiculous weights. And so it was actually my middle brother, James, saw the potential in me and entered me into my first strongman contest when I was 19.
Il-ħobża tal-Malti, il-ħobża tal-Maltin, minant il-Maypole.
So I went and did it, and I came 5th out of like 30 guys, being only 19 years of age. And I got back that day and I fucking loved it. And I wrote on my Facebook status, I'm going to be world's strongest man one day, watch this space. My very first strongman competition, I just fell in love with it. And so I guess that's where the journey began.
Did you tell your nan about it?
I did.
At that point that's going to be your life mission?
So it was so I just started this journey when my nan was on a deathbed, basically. And it was on a deathbed that I actually, I sort of made the promise to my nan that I'm going to win the world's strongest man as she was taking her last breath. So I was the only one present. So that was quite powerful for me. And it sort of stuck in the back of my mind going forward in life. You know, I made this promise to my nan, I can't fucking back down now. So I carried it on. You know, I never gave up this dream or promise to my nan to become the world's strongest man.
Can I ask how come you wound up the only person by her side? All right, man.
Sorry, man.
Sorry. So you decide you're gonna show the world. So you decide you're gonna show the world. You're gonna keep your promise to Nan, and next, like a month later, you win England's strongest man.
Oh, jeez. Sorry, dude. It's a tough one, that is, mate. So yeah, I made this promise, and off I went, and I guess 19 I made the promise, and then 21 I won England's strongest man. I think I was the youngest person to ever win it. 23 I won UK strongest man, which is like a step up, like Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland. Yeah. And then by 24, I was, fully qualified for the world's strongest man. So my journey was quite fast. You know, I rose through the ranks very, very quickly. And during my whole time during strongman, I won UK strongest man six years in a row. And then Britain's strongest man 5 years in a row, which is still the record today. Like no one's ever touched that. No one's ever done more than 3 in a row, you know? So
why would you say that is? Because many of the people that especially have rivals would tend to be, for example, taller than you. Like how is it that you've succeeded so greatly? Because they kind of have more levers and they have probably better mobility because they're a bit taller and so forth. Like how come you distinguish yourself so greatly?
I think there's a few aspects in my life that even I sort of play down a little bit. And number one's the swimming. I think being such a high-level swimmer for such a long time built the internals of my body to such a high spec. And I mean that in the way of like my lung capacity is so large, like it's unreadable in terms of like measurement.
Wow.
My heart was obviously so efficient from being not only a short distance swimmer, but also a long distance swimmer. You know, I would swim 1,500 meters, which is basically a mile, in like 16 minutes. So my fitness was just phenomenal. And I think that carried me into my strongman and gave me such a massive head start, you know, because having that huge heart and huge lungs just made it so much easier. I was able to train so much harder and recover so much quicker just because I was so fit. And I always continue the swimming through that. And then of course we've got the Hercules gene that you mentioned earlier. So this is something I discovered through I did some studies with a university. And some of these studies were really interesting. So they did studies with the carbon dioxide exchange, where they can work out how many calories you burn in a day. So when I was at my biggest, I would sit in a chair like this, and I would do absolutely nothing for 12 hours. And they worked out I would burn 5,500 calories just for sitting in a chair for 12 hours. So it was stuff like that. And the heart study they did was fascinating. So a normal human heart pumps between 4 and 7 liters of blood per minute. And mine was pumping 17 liters of blood per minute. So 2.5 or 3 times as much as a normal heart was, my heart was producing. And it wasn't any bigger than a normal heart. It was the same size as everyone else's heart. It was the efficiency.
Jesus.
And that's what they were saying. It's just like your body is just so built and efficient at what it does.
You come from like a line of like, I don't know, aliens.
So this is also an interesting one. So through the DNA testing as well, I found out that I was 50% sort of Scandinavian, like the Viking gene. And I had no fucking clue because as far as I was aware, both my parents were British. So I went to my parents and was like, where's this? Like, it says I'm 50% Norwegian. Where the fuck has this come from? And my mum was like, oh yeah, I was adopted from Norway. And I had no fucking idea. So it was this DNA test that I actually found out that my mum was actually adopted and that my nan wasn't my real nan, but still my nan to me. So yeah, it opened a whole
Christ.
yeah, opened a whole box of worms, that did.
So I had no idea about that. And but every time I saw you kind of compete, it did feel like a very Nordic, Viking kind of like resilience you have. You also have this kind of, like when you see, for example, yourself and Thor next to each other, you have like this impish danger to you. Like when you're standing, like right before the Atlas, of course you remember it. You're standing there, like you're about to kill someone almost. And I just thought, that guy looks like in another epoch he'd be holding like a gigantic sword and just slaying villages upon villages.
I was a man on a mission, and I wasn't scared of anything or anyone, and I was willing to put myself in these scary situations and push the boundaries probably a lot further than any other human thought possible. And like you say, I'm not the biggest strongman out there. If in fact you put me, I mean, look at that. I mean, Thor's another 5-6 inches bigger than me.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to talk about genetics and like one of the strongest men on the planet, that's the man right there. You know, Thor's 6'10", a natural sort of 400 pounds close to. And these are the kind of fucking freaks I have to compete against, you know? And this is why it was so sort of like, I heard it all the time, like, you're never going to win the world's strongest man. You've got Brian Shaw, you've got Hafthor Bjornsson.
But before you got there, you did something else that people said you're never going to do.
The 500 kilo deadlift.
500 fucking kilos. That's the best pre-workout anyone could ever have.
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe you could load it up so the people over there can understand exactly the drama, the high fucking drama we're talking about here. So up until then, it was thought to be impossible.
Yeah. So.
I think I actually had seen a video of Thor saying, look, it's not possible. It's not doable. You would have to do like 450 by 5.
100%, yeah. So 2016, Thor himself said it was impossible.
Yeah.
In 2016. And I had to, let's just watch it for a second. So I still have to watch it now and again. It's pretty fucking special.
Of course.
I've not actually seen it for a while. There we go. 2, 3. Look at that.
I hope they get the close up.
Nice. There we go. Yeah, I mean, pulling...
Jesus Christ.
So pulling 500 kilo off the floor was the lift of the century, and still is, and always will be, in my opinion. I think because it was just so... There's so much negativity around that lift. You know, the world record in 2015 was 463 kilo. And I remember going up to one of the promoters after that I lifted that 463, and I said, how much money can you put in place if I were to lift 500 kilo? And he fucking burst out laughing right in front of my face. I was like, yeah, how much do you want? So, and that's what I was up against. Every time this 500 kilo was mentioned, everyone was just like, you're fucking deluded. Like every single strongman was just laughing behind my back. All the comments on social media were, and I mean this, every single fucking comment was like, this is deluded. Like, this is not going to happen. This guy's a dickhead. This guy's a fucking idiot. So I had all that fucking negativity to deal with. And I just brushed it all aside and was like, I'm fucking doing this. I'm doing this for myself to level up. And what I mean by that is, for me to win the world's strongest man, I needed a lot of finance. I needed a lot of funds, you know? And, you know, eating 12,000 calories a day isn't cheap, and physio and whatever else. I needed a good bit of money. So this was my key to becoming the world's strongest man. So I did this to sort of put some money in the bank and put that final nail in the coffin to go and chase that world's strongest man title.
Can I understand though, like what's going, like you walk into a stadium, it's rammed with people. You're basically like everyone's hero there.
Yeah.
Like the pressure must be tremendous.
Oh man, yeah. It was all pressure.
Know your food. Book your food intolerance and allergy test now. Browns.
The whole lead up was pressure. Every single night I'd check my phone and I'd see another Eddie Hull's a dickhead, he's fucking deluded, blah, blah, blah. Every fucking day was pressure. And then the day itself, yeah, it was, I mean, geez. So I think my first lift was 420 kilo. And I remember like...
On the day?
On the day.
Okay.
And I remember everybody in the room was like, still not happening. And then my second lift was 465 kilo. And that was the new world record, right? So I had broken the world record already by 2 kilos that day. And then everyone shut up. Every single person in that room was like, fuck, that was fast. And then I pulled the 500, and yeah, it was quite satisfying because you could see the shock on people's faces, like jaws on the floor, like, fuck, he's actually done it. And that was the most satisfying moment. It was just like a nice fuck you to everybody.
Had you succeeded at that during training?
No, so the most I ever lifted in training was 450. So and then the most I ever done in competition was 463 prior to that day. So
and when you say 450, is that one repetition of 450?
Yeah, one repetition, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you just felt it like you're so comfortable at 450 that 500 is going to happen?
It was, so I got in my head, if I can speed rep a 450, like as in just stand up like I'm standing up at this chair, then I knew it was possible. So it's all about the risk reward. As I say, you know, I'm not Thor. I'm not built to lift 500 kilos. So I've got to do something special, and it's going to be a one-off, you know? So that was my mindset. I'm not going to break my back trying to do it in training. Just do it on the day and walk away.
So for people familiar with the scene, so the referee says to drop it, but you don't.
Yeah. So yeah, I sort of savored the moment a little bit.
What's going on through your head?
Well, I mean, doing the lift, I went to a very dark place to sort of actually lift the bar off the floor, you know, horrible shit. Can't really talk about it. And then if you look into my eyes as I lift the bar, sort of as if it zooms in on my eyes, you'll watch my eyes actually turn color, genuinely turn color. If it shows the, like, if you pause it as my eyes are...
At the close-up.
Yeah, if there is a close-up, there isn't.
Are we talking about the iris?
But yeah, no, the blue.
Okay.
The brightest blue eyes. Like, where the fuck did they come from? Like, my fucking eye color changed. It was surreal. So I sort of just do the lift, and I don't remember anything. I just remember waking up at the top of the lift, like, fuck, I've done it. And it was just like savoring this moment, like, yes, like, fuck you.
And what about the nosebleed? What was that?
So yeah, obviously a lot of pressure. Because I wasn't sort of accustomed to that weight, it was just so much pressure my body wasn't used to. You know, I wasn't doing it in training. It was a one-off, and yeah, I guess things.
Are those like capillaries inside the nose that are bursting?
It was a bleed on the brain. Yeah,
on the brain.
Yeah, it was quite bad. So
what was the effect of that on
bleeding out the nose, blood in the tear ducts, blood in the ears, and just afterwards couldn't get my adrenaline to come back down, so my heart rate was just like at the top, all the like 200 beats per minute, just stuck there. just, I psyched myself up that much. I couldn't bring myself back down.
Wow.
So yeah, I lost my vision a little bit, and that's also one of the effects of too much adrenaline. You know, you just get this tunnel vision kind of thing. So yeah, it took me a while, and look how blue my eyes are there.
Jeez.
It was like I wasn't wearing contact lenses. It's just fucking surreal how they did actually change color. So yeah,
and
then
you were surprised you're a Viking.
Tell you what, when I got that DNA test result back, it said I was half Norwegian. I was like, this fucking makes sense. Yeah,
It's all clicking now.
it's all clicking.
So obviously these are the triumphs. What are the disappointments? What is it? What is the tough side of being Eddie Hall? Where is the darkness? Where is that?
So I guess the darkness after winning World's Strongest Man is, and you can ask any top sportsman this, it's with any high there's a low, and with any super high like winning the World's Strongest Man, there's always going to be a super low. And I guess, you know, winning the World's Strongest Man and standing on that podium and receiving that trophy and having that fucking huge amount of euphoria, like I can't explain it. I the only way I can explain it is like when you get that euphoria and that like uncontrollable sensation one of your kids has been born. Yeah, you're in hospital and your kid's just been born. That's the feeling I got. And if I'm being honest, probably way fucking better than that. It was just the most surreal feeling I've ever felt. But then 2 days later, I'm back home and I'm changing fucking nappies and putting dishes in the dishwasher and just nothing fucking changes. And I guess that's all about the highs and the lows, and those lows can be fucking
Why
bad.
does nothing change?
It just doesn't, because, you know, you expect, I don't know, it's a weird one. I guess I spent 10 years chasing that World's Strongest Man title, and it gave me purpose. And then I almost felt like I'd almost jinxed myself a little bit, you know, sort of ruined my life a little bit by winning the World's Strongest Man, because I'd achieved my childhood dream. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do, and it was like, fuck, what next?
Yeah.
And I genuinely didn't know what to fucking do with myself.
Yeah.
So that was a worrying time and a very low depressive time for myself.
I'd like to kind of, give the audience a bit more of kind of like an understanding of how you got to 2017, of course, was in Botswana, I believe.
Yeah.
At that point, you were weighing, if I'm correct, 194 kilos.
196.
196 kilos.
196 kilos.
How uncomfortable is it to walk around at 196
It's
kilos?
fucking uncomfy. Yeah, it's like, even you like struggle to put your socks on, like walking up a stairs, like fuck, like getting clothes to fit, getting dressed, just like everyday shit, fitting on a plane. You can't fit on a train, you can't fit in your car. Like when you're 200 kilo, these things are fucking hard tasks.
Yeah.
So I guess just like a constant drag, like an everyday drag on your life, because you're just always uncomfortable.
Did you feel like you had to compensate for the height?
Probably, yeah. No, that's probably it. And I guess that is definitely something that played on my mind all the time. You know, I can't be as big as these guys, as in height, but I can be as big as them in terms of muscle mass, if not bigger. So I was, you know, that was my frame of mind. If you're gonna go and pull a plane at World's Strongest Man, let's say this plane weighs 100 kilo and you weigh 100 kilo, it's gonna move all right. But if plane weighs 100 kilo and you weigh 200 kilo, you're gonna pull it dead easy. So weight moves weight. That was my sort of perception of strongman, especially back then. So yeah, the heavier you were, the stronger and more able you were at the World's Strongest Man.
Was there any point where you said, fuck this is not worthwhile?
No, everything was worth it.
At any point where you thought that you're not going to become the world's strongest man?
I mean, look, doubt creeps in almost on a daily basis when you're training for those things. You know, you rip a little bit of a muscle in your bicep. It's, oh no, that's felt, my dream's gone. You know, you get these injuries all the time. You don't hit the PBs you want to in training. You go to a competition, you perform as, you know, not as good as you wanted to. There's those little doubts that I always call it that inner bitch. That inner bitch kicks in sometimes and says, you're not going to win it. You're pathetic. You know, you're just not good enough. So yeah, the doubts creep in.
And how do you deal with the inner bitch?
Consistency. You know, you tell that inner bitch to shut the fuck up and that you are worthwhile and that you can do these things. You've literally got to have conversations in your own head.
At which point did you realize the deal is sealed, I'm done? I'm winning the world's strongest man. I am the world's strongest man. At which point did that happen?
I guess when I pulled the 500 kilo deadlift, that gave me the belief. That just set my belief up completely. Because it was
a year earlier.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, doing something so special as that was deemed impossible, it was like, if I can do that, then everyone thought it was impossible. 100% I can win the world's strongest man. And my confidence from pulling the 500 kilo probably made the difference to me winning the world's strongest man the next year. Because I just believed I was stronger and better than everybody else. And I was.
Did you reflect on how you start out, you know, in life? You're just like this kid from Stoke-on-Trent, and now you're standing on the world's biggest podium.
Yeah, I do reflect. You know, I still live in my neighborhood where I started out. You know, I live a mile from where I was born. So, you know, I see the same people. I see the same clerks at the supermarket, at the petrol station. I see some of my old friends. And yeah, sometimes I go home to my castle and it's like I have to sit back in my garden sometimes and be like, fuck, this is fucking amazing. You know, and that's where I count my blessings and think I am lucky and blessed to be where I am.
I often see videos of you and Maximus working out.
Yeah.
Do you think he'll follow your path?
I think for the minute, Max is 13, just turned 13. And he's been lifting weights now since his 10th birthday. So he's been doing it 3 years. And he's fucking strong. Like, forget his deadlift. His deadlift's amazing, but just his core strength. Like, he's just shy of 6 foot tall and he's 97 kilo of solid muscle. And I fight. Yeah. I mean, that's him when he was 10. Right? So I fight at the minute, and I MMA train and fight, you know, big guys. And when I wrestle with my son, honestly, he's fucking stronger than most adults. Like big 6 foot tall adults that are 30, 40 years of age. He fucking way stronger than him. So sometimes I think maybe I should get my son here and get some, you know, do my training with my son because he can fucking beat most adults up. His core strength, like his wrist strength, his elbow strength, his hands are as big as mine. You know, he's got the capabilities and he's definitely strong. Is he going to follow my footsteps? That's totally down to him. You know, he's got all the attributes and I'm putting all the right pieces in place for him to take that option. He's not that arsed.
How often do you guys train together?
Well, he's in the gym 4 times a week and I try and join him. I employ a coach for him just to take away that stress of father-son training, you know? Yeah. And I try and join him as much as I can. So, you know, if I can join him for those 4 sessions, I will.
And what's one trait that you hope Max will inherit from his dad?
Not taking any fucking bullshit in today's society. All this fucking woke bullshit. I want my son to be like me in that respect and not fall to this absolute crap that's happening in the world right now, bowing down to fucking X, Y, and Z. I am sick to fucking death. Like the stuff that's just happened with Charlie Kirk. If anything, I want my son to be a fucking man. You know, they keep calling it toxic masculinity. It's not. It's just a man being a fucking man. And that's what I want my son to be. I want my son to be a fucking man and not give a fuck about what anyone says.
What is a fucking man?
A fucking man is someone that goes out, conquers his fucking day, and brings the bread home to his family. That's a man for me. If you can do that and be respectful and be polite and be Adonis and go out and win the world's strongest man and, you know, do fucking cool shit, buy tanks, that's a fucking man to me. A man that just fucking lives his life, has a good job, puts bread on the table for his family, and fucking has fun. That's a man.
Yeah, the Charlie Kirk thing was quite a shock to me as well. I was really, I think the thing that pissed me off the most was seeing people celebrate his death. I think I was sick.
Those are the fucking most cowardly people on planet Earth. The people the person that fucking shot him is not as big as a coward as those motherfuckers on social media that celebrated his death. I think they are the biggest fucking cowards the fucking humanity has ever seen. It's fucking disgusting.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy? Like when you look at these people that celebrate his death, if the world had to be contingent on violence, they'd be the first to get fucked up.
100%. And then, oh man, I've had this conversation a million times. You know, if World War III fucking came, who the fuck is going to be on the front line? It won't be those motherfuckers. I tell you now, it'll be fucking us men.
So, my man, what's the future for Eddie Hall?
So the future for me, hopefully I don't get cancelled by anything I just said.
You're too big. I think you're too big to get cancelled at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm pretty much uncancelable at this point. I've said and done a lot worse than that. But geez, man, I'm just having fun. You know, I'm traveling the world. I'm doing arm wrestling, which I quite enjoy. I am doing MMA fighting. So I'm just taking fights, and I'm just taking big fights, you know, fights that put a lot of money in the bank. I'm not asked about being a number one contender in the world or the number one ranked fighter in any federation. I don't give a fuck about that. I want to go out and smash people's faces in and make a lot of money. That's
so we're going to continue on this fighting route that you started?
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get the right fights, you know, to get that fuck you money in the bank. And that's what life's about. So that I'm doing films. You know, I'm traveling about. I'm doing films with, you know, did a little part in Expendables 4. I'm doing films here in Malta.
What was that Expendables 4?
So I did a part with Jason Statham and Sylvester Stallone in a fight scene. And I ended up picking up Jason Statham with one arm. Just before I collared him, Stallone shot me. And then I went to tackle Stallone and he put me over a bar and I got knocked unconscious. So that's like my claim to fame with Stallone and Jason Statham. That was pretty cool. And then I've done a couple of movies since then that's still yet to be released. And I'm hoping to, like I say, these contacts I've made here in Malta, I'm hoping to get stuck into this film. It's one of my passions, you know, acting. I've been doing acting lessons for over 2 years now, 3 years. And yeah, I enjoy it. And I guess I'm not anchoring into just one thing. You know, I'm not just doing acting or just doing arm wrestling or just doing MMA. I'm doing it fucking all because I enjoy it all.
Bro, I have a script for you because I'm a writer. I'll speak to the producer later. I have a fucking script for you.
Okay.
I really fucking do. I actually, it's been there for about 2-3 years sitting, and I think you are the person for it.
Okay.
Biżjed minn 20 sena esperjenza ISS joffru għażla kbira ta' dwar, plakek, switchijiet u aċċessorji elettriċi ta' kwalità li jgħinuni nsib dak kollu li għandi bżonn għal dari u għal familti, żuruhom ġewwa x-showroom tagħhom l-imrieħel jew inkella fuq ess.com.mt.
It'll be fucking amazing. All right, listen, tell us more about this project that you're doing in Malta right now. What can people do to come watch?
So Battle of the Beasts is happening the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of October. We are at the beach, we are at the fort, and I think that's it. But yeah, there's tickets available from Battle of the Beasts _official Instagram page. And yeah, we're just hopping around the island over the next couple of weeks, filming all the shots that we need, all the interviews, and then we've got the athletes coming over this Sunday coming. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of big guys coming to Malta in the next week or two.
Is Tommy Fury going to be here as well?
I think Tommy Fury is due in, yes. Is he famous here? Because I bet
quite
love it. I saw all the girls in the room were like, yeah, he's quite fair. yeah. So like, he's like Love Island. Everyone loves all the girls love Island, don't they? Yeah. It's funny because I go out with Tommy and the fucking girls melt over him. Yeah, like married women just like drop the knickers in front of him. Yeah, and I don't blame him. He's a good-looking bloke.
The other dude is Brian Shaw, of course. He's going to be around.
Brian Shaw is coming, yeah, so he's co-hosting with me. So we've got Big Brian here as well. He's not... people don't tend to drop knickers around him as much, but he's big. He's a big guy, you know?
All right, so listen, Eddie Hall, it's been an absolute privilege and honor to have you here. I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, hope to see you more around the island.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you. See you next week.
Damn.
Mela tlaqna.